You're strapped to a table in some deep, dark dungeon in the bowels of a castle. There's a skeleton handcuffed to the wall and a table full of nasty-looking equipment next to you. Who knows what crime you committed, but whatever it was, it upset the king enough that he sentenced you to death. Bummer. The thing is, you don't know exactly how you're being put to death. Maybe they'll torture you for a bit and then hang you. Classic. Maybe your fate is leaning over the headsman's block and waiting for an axe to come down. Maybe if you're unlucky, you'll be drowned for your sins. But no, what's going to happen to you is much, much worse. The door to the dungeon opens and the executioner enters. He takes a long blade and slices open your shirt, then takes a piece of charcoal and draws a dotted line from the bottom of your rib cage to just above your pelvis, right across your stomach. You know what's going to happen now, and you start pleading for mercy, pleading that he'll at least kill you quickly. He just smiles a black-toothed grin and picks 2 instruments from his torture table, a rusty serrated blade and a long, gnarled hook. Before you can blubber out another protest, he plunges the knife at the top of the dotted line and starts cutting. Disembowelment. It's an excruciating and humiliating death, considered by many to be one of the worst punishments in the history of mankind. While we often think of animal slaughter when we think of disembowelment, it's been used on humans for millennia. Not to be confused with dismemberment, the cutting off of a victim's limbs. Disembowelment is cutting open the victim's body and ripping out their organs. Yep, it's going to be that kind of episode. In most cases, the victim is kept fully conscious during the disembowelment. After watching their intestines being removed, the victim will eventually pass out from blood loss. Some forms of disembowelment involve decapitation and the removal of heart and lungs, like cattle for slaughter. This might seem shocking, but believe us, we're only getting started. Because when you hear about the sheer number of brutally creative variations on disembowelment that twisted humans have come up with over the years, we guarantee it'll turn your stomach. Just be grateful that your stomach's still in your body. You might be wondering, where did human beings get the idea to start ripping people's guts out? Well, obviously, it's been a fixture of animal butchery since we were eating meat. Still, disembowelment has been intertwined with the punishment of humans in mythology for thousands of years. So much so that it's often a choice favored by actual gods. Take the ancient Greek myth of Prometheus, who stole the gift of fire from the gods on behalf of humanity. And Zeus, king of the Greek gods, he wasn't so happy about that. As a punishment, he had Prometheus lashed to a rock, where an eagle would turn up daily, chew through his body and eat his liver. His liver would then grow back so the eagle could return the next day and eat it again. Thousands of years later, in Christian mythology, some tellings of the death of Judas, the disciple who betrayed Jesus to the Romans for silver, report that his intestines spilled out of his body upon his hanging. This isn't the only time ancient Romans and disembowelment have crossed over either. Around 303 AD, Erasmus of Fourmier, who would also become known as Saint Elmo, was executed in the Roman province of Illyria. Saint Elmo was brutally tortured by Emperor Diocletian and Maximilian before his disembowelment, and his intestines were wound around a windlass. It's fitting that Saint Elmo is considered a patron saint of intestinal disorders, women in labor, and sailors, all thanks to the fact that he was disemboweled. So if your gut ever hurts so bad that you feel like you need to pray, Saint Elmo feels your pain. But let's not dogpile on the Romans. The ancient world was chock full of cultures who were all too eager to rip out each other's guts. Take, for example, the Vikings, who refined war and overseas looting and pillaging into a savage art form. Should it surprise anyone then that they had punishment that involved ripping people's lungs from their backs too? While sources were split on whether the practice was widespread or more a fixture of legend, the blood eagle torture involved pushing a victim down onto their knees and slashing open the skin of their back. The torture would then break the victim's ribs from behind and pull out the lungs so they dangled against the back like a bloody pair of eagle's wings. Fans of the TV show Hannibal and the horror movie Midsummer have all already seen this in horrific action. But now you get the pleasure of knowing real human beings might have experienced it. Okay, let's move on before the trauma of that sets in and give you some fresh new trauma to replace it. Feel free to become a member of the channel to help pay for all of our therapy bills. Not to be left out in any conversations about brutal and creative punishments, the Aztecs also had their own frightening variation of disembowelment punishments. Nezahualcóyotl was the ruler of the Mesoamerican city-state known as Texcoco. He was also a warrior, a philosopher, a poet, and not a big fan of homosexuality. In a code of law he wrote, a particularly gruesome punishment was given to people engaging in homosexual intercourse. Those in the passive role of the act would have their intestines ripped out before having their empty body cavities stuffed with ash and, as the icing on this sadistic cake, being cremated. Those who took the more active role in the act wouldn't be disemboweled, they'd just be suffocated in a big pile of ash. Yeah, it seems to us that Nezahualcóyotl was a real ash hole. But we'd be cheating the Aztecs out of most of the glory if we didn't mention the more infamous way that the Aztecs ripped out organs of people during their truly horrific human sacrifice rituals. You see, while the Aztecs sacrificed many of their own to the various deities, they also had a habit of sacrificing enemies that they captured during wars. Unlike most warrior cultures, Aztec warriors who killed their enemies were seen as sloppy and undignified. The true honor was bagging them alive so they could be sacrificed atop the many Aztec pyramids. But what exactly did these sacrificial ceremonies entail? Being in this video should probably give you a clue, but in many of the rituals, the victims would be dragged to the top of the Aztec pyramids while they were still alive. Once they were placed at the altar of the top of the pyramid, the high priest would cut their hearts out with a sacrificial dagger. In some of the more ostentatious ceremonies, thousands of people would have their hearts ripped out in a single sitting. Say what you will about the Aztecs, but they were undeniably efficient folks when it came to organ removal. However, the best known example of disembowelment as punishment comes from medieval England's answer for treason. So, how did the British flavor of disembowelment play out? Let's take a look. In 1241, the son of an English nobleman, William Maurice, was convicted of piracy. As all ships sail in the king's name, piracy is considered an act against a monarch, and therefore an act against God's established order. He would be executed in 1242, becoming the first known person to be punished by hanging, drawing, and quartering. Maurice, or anyone else who is condemned to hanging, drawing, and quartering, would first be dragged to the execution site by horse. Despite the order of the name, the drawing part comes first. Sometimes they might even be given a lashing as they were dragged. It would be the first bit of agony that they could experience prior to the official execution. According to an author, Richard Clarke, who wrote Capital Punishment in Britain, it would probably be a good 3-hour drag, all while crowds would jeer and throw garbage at the condemned. It really brought the community together before tearing the victim's body apart. Then they would tie a rope around the victim's neck to pull them off the ground. Maurice would helplessly hang there, thrashing in some futile attempt to free himself, and they'd wait until he fell unconscious before lowering him back down. After all that, it would be time for the part we've all been waiting for, the brutal public disembowelment. By this point, the condemned criminal was dead, so the quartering was just a publicity stunt. Executioners would carve the body up and sever the limbs before parboiling them in a blend of spices. Yummy. This was meant to help preserve the flesh before they took the mutilated parts on a tour around whatever town that poor sap had been executed in. A much more famous figure than Maurice met their end as the result of this execution method. His name might even sound familiar, especially if your home happens to be in Scotland. If you've ever seen Braveheart, you're already familiar with Scottish rebel William Wallace, but there's one thing the movie got wrong: his execution. He wasn't beheaded like he was in the film, or at least he wasn't just beheaded. In reality, William Wallace was hanged, drawn, and quartered on the same day as his trial. After being captured in Glasgow, he was to be brought to London weeks before his execution. On August 5, 1305, he was dragged naked behind a horse to where he'd be executed, Smithfield, as onlookers jeered. He was hanged and emasculated. They would burn his testes and his penis in front of him out of spite. Then they disemboweled him, tore out his heart, and quartered his lifeless body. His body parts were sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling to be put on display. Meanwhile, his head would be dipped in tar and placed on a spike on the London Bridge, and they also have no record of him yelling "Freedom!" In actuality, he was probably yelling "Ah! Ah!" Now, we can understand why the movie directors decided not to show how he actually died, especially if they wanted to sidestep that NC-17 rating. But next time you watch Braveheart, remember how gruesome his actual execution was. When it came to quartering the victim, it was sometimes accomplished by tying each limb to a different horse. The horses would be sent running in different directions to rip the victim's body apart. After the execution, the corpse would be displayed in various locations like London Bridge or Westminster Hall. The bodies acted as a warning to England's population as to why you shouldn't betray the monarchy and what consequences you might face if you did. Another famous person who learned this the very hard way was a certain Guy Fawkes. Fawkes was at the center of the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, one of the most infamous unsuccessful treason attempts in history, so much so that it's still celebrated every November 5th in England to this day. Fawkes and a group of radical English Catholics attempted to assassinate King James I, who persecuted Catholics in a bid to promote Protestantism. They had a plot to blow up Parliament's House of Lords, but everything went wrong and the plot didn't succeed. Instead, all the conspirators were caught and killed. Fox was sentenced to hanging, drawing, and quartering. On January 31, 1606, they would carry out his sentence in Westminster. But, as what felt like the final act of rebellion from Fox, he would die when his neck was broken as he was hanged. Some say he had deliberately jumped to break his neck, wanting to avoid the more horrific part of his sentence. While this meant his entrails would not be publicly removed, they did still quarter him. His body parts were displayed in all four corners of the kingdom. If you think we're picking on England here, don't worry, the rest of Europe was still getting its disembowelment on well after the Roman Empire collapsed. In the Netherlands, on July 10, 1584, Willem I the Silent, Prince of Oranje, was assassinated by Balthasar Gerard. Gerard had carried out the assassination to receive the 25,000 crowns that King Philip II of Spain offered to whoever could kill the prince. Willem I had been advocating for Dutch independence from the King of Spain, and in 1568 led the Netherlands in a revolt against what he saw as Spanish occupation. Gerard went to Prinsenhof, the royal palace in Delft, at noon on July 10th to speak with Willem. He was turned away when Willem was still at lunch. Gerard would head back to the inn to grab his pistols before returning. By then, Willem had finished lunch and he was headed to the stairs to his second-floor chamber. Hiding behind a pillar, Gerard jumped out and shot twice. He hit Willem in the chest at close range, killing him instantly. When Gerard tried to flee, he was chased by soldiers and servants, and they caught him as he was trying to climb a wall to escape the royal palace compound. He was captured, tortured, and sentenced to death. In order to make an example of him, he was brutally executed on July 14, 1584. They burned off his right hand with a red-hot iron. They tore his flesh from his bones with pincers in 6 different places, and he was then quartered and disemboweled while he was still alive. They tore out his heart, threw it in his face, and then beheaded him. The Aztecs would have been proud. Thankfully, disembowelment as punishment is relegated to the distant past. It's a dark shadow on the history books, never forgotten but thankfully left behind. Wait, what's that? There are actually still a scary number of disembowelments occurring in the last century? Well, I suppose we better buckle up and look into those too. During World War II, Romania was under the rule of Ion Antonescu, a fascist dictator who rose to power in 1940. At that time, the Romanian capital of Bucharest had a large Jewish population, which grew as refugees fled to the city in hopes of finding safety. By 1941, 100,000 Jewish people lived in the capital. Bucharest was also home to an anti-Semitic, nationalist, and fascist paramilitary organization called the Iron Guard, staffed by so-called legionnaires. Horia Sima, the Iron Guard's leader, held significant political power in 1941, working as the vice president of the Council of Ministers. He and Antonescu would butt heads over the many issues regarding how to run the country, particularly on confiscating Jewish property. The Iron Guard wanted to take it all immediately, while Antonescu wanted to implement a far more gradual process. This disagreement developed into the Iron Guard becoming skeptical of Antonescu's commitment to the fascist cause, leading to them starting to plan a coup. They spread propaganda that connected Antonescu to the Jewish people since his stepmother and his ex-wife were Jewish. Antonescu, seeing that his power was being undermined, fought back and weakened the Iron Guard's power within the government. In time, a rebellion would erupt, with the Iron Guard storming the government. Meanwhile, the legionnaires began a pogrom, a massacre of a particular ethnic group against the Jewish people within the country. They stormed Jewish homes and synagogues, neighborhoods were set on fire, Jews were slaughtered at random and tortured. One of the most horrific incidents of the pogrom involved disembowelment. The legionnaires took 15 Jews to a local slaughterhouse to be shot. However, 5 of them, including a 5-year-old girl, were hung on meat hooks while they were still alive. The legionnaires gutted them and hung their entrails around their necks, labeling their bodies as kosher, referencing the Jewish ritual slaughter Shita. The 40s were a horrific time for the human race, where many things previously thought impossible, from the pogroms to the Holocaust to the mass devastation of atomic weaponry, were enacted on innocent people in the name of authority or war. And we'd love to tell you that that was cut off when disembowelment as a punishment was stamped out once and for all. But our tales go on in increasingly nightmarish ways. During the Vietnam War, there have been accounts of the Viet Cong sometimes using disembowelment as a twisted form of psychological warfare to coerce and intimidate rural peasants. The former head of Saigon's Central Intelligence Agency, Pierre de Silva, stated that possibly since 1963, the Viet Cong used disembowelment and other types of mutilation to intimidate those under their control. However, no one really knows to what extent the punishment was used. Although there are detailed accounts of civilians being disemboweled, it appears that it was used quite arbitrarily, and there are no actual records of it being sanctioned by the government in Hanoi. Still, those stories of military brutality are echoed by ones that came later during the First Liberian Civil War in the 1980s. There are many harrowing accounts of warlords disemboweling children's parents in front of them to break their minds and desensitize them so they would work as child soldiers. But it still doesn't stop there. Disembowelment has slithered its way into the 21st century, being practiced by a number of different authorities, and it's just as horrifying as ever. There have been multiple reports of the People's Republic of China committing atrocities involving forced organ harvesting against various captured minorities, including Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Muslims, and Christians. While the PRC has categorically denied these claims, a number of human rights watchdogs have requested permission to send independent inspectors to confirm or deny claims that organs are being taken out of political prisoners for transplant and sale. Continuing on the quote-unquote legacy of the practice, multiple criminals and terrorist groups use forms of disembowelment as a way to punish and intimidate their enemies. In addition to their many other horrific crimes, there have been reports of ISIS members disemboweling prisoners and harvesting their organs. The same can be said of some of the extremely brutal Mexican drug cartels, whose cutthroat industry forces them to ever more violent practices to stay on top. In 2011, a woman in Mexico who had decried the actions of the cartel on social media was hogtied and disemboweled with a knife before being hung upside down as a message to other people who dare speak up against their illegal activities. As long as people act and treat each other like animals, disembowelment will likely endure, and it isn't even always the people in power that are doing it. In 2022, a New York City man attacked and disemboweled his roommate in the aftermath of a heated argument. Some really bad habits die hard. If you like this video, check out Eaten Alive, Scaphism, Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind, and White Room Torture, Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind.